Welcome to BIOS Ventures. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Galym Imanbayev, partner at Lightspeed Venture Partners, to the show. Galym, thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you, Chris. Much appreciated. Big fan of the show and happy to be here.
Let's kick things off. Galym, can you share a brief personal introduction with us?
Sure, absolutely. My story begins in Kazakhstan. I was born in Kazakhstan in the major city there, Almaty. I moved to the States when I was about 8 years old. Grew up in the Pacific Northwest in a suburb of Portland, Oregon. Afterwards, went to Stanford for undergrad. Spent the majority of my time in undergrad in basic science research. But that was, I would say, my extracurricular time. On my curricular time, I actually majored in economics while at the same time doing all the pre-med requirements. So it was a rather busy and tight undergrad experience. It was busy to the point that I didn't time my MCAT right. And so decided that I needed to essentially take a gap year. And, in hindsight, I thought, look, a gap year helps with your med school applications, makes you a little bit more interesting. So I thought, okay, let's go ahead and do it. And I was thinking about, doing the usual thing that a lot of people do in a gap year, a research year. But since I had done econ as an interest area of mine for some time, I thought, well, if I'm going to be doing medicine for all my life, might as well take the gap year to try something different. So I went ahead and in that gap year, I was late to all of the various recruiting cycles for banking, consulting, all of that, but managed to get a role in the spring with PwC right as they were building out their pharma consulting arm. And I did that for about 10 months, really enjoyed it. But, frankly, found that I started looking through all of the recipients of the reports that we were doing as consultants. And when I looked at the recipients and saw all these venture capital funds, private equity firms, that was the first time I started to really think about, okay, so these are the folks who take these insights and then actuate them into some level of practice. And so I was really intrigued by that, decided to go ahead and quit PwC to find a role in venture just for the summer before I started med school. Managed to somehow claw my way into a fund called Capricorn. It was an internship summer. I really wasn't expecting much, but I enjoyed it so much that I felt like, I was learning a ton. I was learning the business of venture capital, how to invest. It also a business of private equity and different kind of structures in regards to financing. And as that was happening, I realized I wanted to keep learning. So I decided to defer for 1 year and then deferred again for another year, and ultimately took 3 years gap year before I returned back to med school and spent most of that time at that fund called Capricorn. Ultimately, when I went back to school, that was a decision point as well, though. I was thinking, maybe if I enjoy investing, I should just stay there. But I still felt this itch to get a graduate school education. I still very much thought I would be a hybrid physician with something else. And that required you to get an MD. And I really enjoyed patient care when I did do some of it in undergrad. So ultimately went back to school and then did the MD degree, tacked on the MBA as well from Stanford. And it was more towards that experience. This was 5 years. I was back at Stanford, and I spent most of my evenings and weekends essentially side hustling. In some ways, I wish I had done the MD PhD because that would have paid for my graduate education. MD MBA is like a really expensive MD and even more expensive MBA. So all my savings that I made in the gap years went out the first year. And then after that, I thought, look, I have to do something. I really wanted to graduate without much debt, if any. So I side hustled, did consulting projects for various portfolio companies for the previous fund, did angel investing myself. And as I was entering the MBA the last couple of years, I realized, these evenings and weekends is when I felt most energized, is when I was doing the work that I was both excited about and it didn't feel like work. And that's when the first ideas started entering my mind to think, maybe residency isn't the path for me, but it's really this intersection of investment and healthcare that I've been pursuing for a long time. It has roots all the way back to my childhood that I felt like, this is the fork. So ultimately, I decided to not do residency, and serendipitously got the chance to meet the folks at Lightspeed right before I set up my full list of 10 funds that I wanted to target. I got a chance to meet Lightspeed, and for reasons I'm sure I'll share later, I decided to go there. And I've been there now for about 2 years, and we've been very busy. We've invested, I think, over a dozen companies in the last year and a half, and we'll probably continue at a similar pace.
No, it's phenomenal. And you've really built an incredible journey. And I also really appreciate the hustle. It's especially fitting, and as you said, I'm sure we're going to get into it. But before we dive too much deeper, do you mind just also providing a bit of context for the audience and you've shared a phenomenal intro on yourself. Can you share a brief one on Lightspeed for us as well?
Yes, absolutely. So Lightspeed is a large global venture fund. It's been around since about year 2000. And now assets under management are about 18 billion, of which 7 billion just got recently raised. The fund, back in its origin story, is very much like many technology venture funds. It started out in enterprise, eventually built out a consumer team, all still within technology. And then in 2009, the fund started to enter the realm of, I would say, healthcare broadly defined through the lens of bioinformatics. They understood the power of big data. They understood the power of infrastructure. And so as companies like Natera started coming out, that was one of the first real kind of investments that Lightspeed had done in the health tech space. So started with Natera in 2009, then added on Personalis, companies like Carius, Guardant Health, and ultimately in 2015, after showing that there's been some good traction on that end, the fund started to the fund recruited a person on the team named Jonathan McQuitty, who ultimately recruited me to join Lightspeed. And he, in some ways, shepherded the fund to start doing investments into therapeutics. And as you know, that's a different style of investing, different asset class in many ways, has its own quirks. And that then the investments from there included companies like 47, which eventually got sold for 4.9 billion, Teneo Bio, which has had multiple exits, Orca Bio, which is doing well. And with that kind of affirmation that the biotech and the therapeutics realm is yielding good results, the fund decided to build out a fully dedicated team to that. And so that is how I came into the picture right as they were thinking about that. Jonathan McQuitty continues to lead the group. We have a new member on the team, Shelley Chu, who used to be the head of R&D strategy at Gilead and has had a tremendous career in therapeutics investing. And then we have an advisor, Ling Wang, who's on the team as well and does a number of things on the health tech side as well. So now we're kind of a lean, mean machine, but I'll go into kind of what we invest in and all those things later, but that I should give you a flavor in terms of the history of how we came to be.
Absolutely. And it sounds like a phenomenal team to be working with. So, as you said, let's dive deeper and start with your own journey to VC. As you mentioned, you grew up in Kazakhstan before coming to the US in 1998. Are you open to sharing a little bit more about that transition?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Kazakhstan, like I grew up technically a member of the Soviet Union. Like I was born in 1990. So my birth certificate and Kazakhstan, random factoid, was the last country of the Soviet republics to secede, from the Soviet Union. So at one point, Kazakhstan was the Soviet Union. In any case, the years after that were quite tumultuous. My father, through his education and through his experiences, was able to hold a number of very important functions, particularly both on the investment side, for investment for Kazakhstan, but also particularly in healthcare. There was at a point that the funds from Moscow stopped flowing and healthcare infrastructure was starting to fall apart. And my father was appointed by the prime minister to help essentially reestablish universal healthcare, reestablish the core infrastructure. And it was part of you do, it is funny, but there is a very famous, well, it's not that famous for the layperson, but there's a declaration of Almaty which is like named after my city. It was, I think it was the 1970s. Don't quote me on that, but it was a declaration of how to do primary care right. And it was an international decision. And now we're actually going back to some of these things and, starting to understand how to do actually primary care on a in a scaled way. Anyway, so he had that experience, and as part of his efforts, he had to go to one of the things it was really important for him was to make sure that health was distributed evenly. So it wasn't just the cities that would benefit. There's just a few major cities in Kazakhstan, and that's where most of the resources went. But credit to my father, he did have that equity in mind. And so I would join him to these trips in rural Kazakhstan where he would essentially set up both telecommunications infrastructure, but also would set up really critical medicine needs for tuberculosis. And I remember in particular these trips and how the power of medicine impacting not just an individual, but a full community. You just I remember falling asleep to like the beating drum of people's like coughs because of how bad the tuberculosis was. We come back to there, a later time, coughs are gone. So it's just these, and you see the smile on people's faces. So for me, I saw early on in childhood, not just that health and medicine has an enormous impact, but in some ways, maybe subconsciously, as a kid, I probably didn't think about it in a systems way, but subconsciously, I think I internalized the fact that medicine was brought, it was distributed, it wasn't just magical that some doctor came and that was it. So there was some of this got seeded, and eventually my family, we had to move to the United States for political asylum, as the political situation in Kazakhstan and many former Soviet Union states was quite unstable, and didn't really, unfortunately at that time, did not promote keeping smart folks who would uncover some things that oftentimes people in government didn't want to uncover. So that got us over here to the States.
Well, I think it's definitely our game and an absolutely incredible journey. It sounds like it seems very clear that even from the beginning, you gain that awareness, as you described, of healthcare challenges, and through that, maybe subconsciously develop that passion for the space you were talking about. I know that being first generation myself, my parents have been a phenomenal inspiration, and it sounds like your father was for you as well. And so now you're in the US, and as you mentioned, you went to undergraduate at Stanford, and you were both pre-med and majoring in economics. And after you went to PwC as a healthcare consultant, and then Capricorn, which is now Martis, as a healthcare
Mhm.
investor before returning to Stanford for your MD MBA. Can you tell us a little bit more, and you touched on this in your introduction, but about your motivations at this early stage of your career? It seems like even
Mhm.
from the beginning, and maybe again, you were talking about that systemic distribution of healthcare. Why the
Mhm.
intersection of healthcare and business?
Yeah. So I think in some ways that realization kind of waxed and waned over a period of time. There was at a certain time, when I went to undergrad, and this is something that we really need to work on as a society, particularly in medicine, that the grind to be a competitive pre-med student, I mean, nearly suck the energy out of me to even think or have enough bandwidth mindshare to think about, oh, the systems approach. It just happened to be that I really liked economics, and that was like my respite for all the pre-med activities that I was doing. So econ became my major and in some ways I did it out of, one of the things my father taught me was, when I would complain about having too much work or anything, he would say, yeah, when you change subjects, when you change topics that you're thinking about or working on, that is one part of your brain resting and another part taking. So it should always be viewed as rest when you're just switching between. And in some ways, maybe a weird way, I did internalize it. And when I did econ, it was really be like, all right, thank God I'm not doing like nonstop, pre-med work, doing the lab work, doing all the research. And so I think that helped keep me abreast of what was going on. But even then, it was a very academic. I did not understand what venture capital was. I was in the heart of Silicon Valley, and I really did not see it or feel it
Mhm.
as undergrad. Part of it is just, again, staying in lab until 1 a.m. did not uh, help.
Something I think a lot of us can relate to, especially at the undergrad stage. And it's also something where I think that's, I suspect, going to resonate with a lot of people. what you said about giving your mind a break, learning something else, viewing that as a compliment to your work, and coming back to it a little bit more energized. But on top of that, also thinking a little bit more broadly about what
Yeah.
you're working on. All of that and having that encompassing perspective is valuable. And it sort of double down, reinforce the sort of duality, I think, between that community aspect you were talking about and that broader business side with the healthcare distribution and care. And so, did you
Mhm.
always know that this, and maybe again subconsciously, this breadth of exploration as you explored so many things would, especially once you got into the professional world, lead you to bioinvesting?
I think so. Yes. I think frankly, I think that duality was there. Again, I think there were moments I almost lost it, but I think that that gap year was crucial for me. I could have spent that entire year doing research, but instead I went and exposed myself. I got to work on projects with a number of pharma companies, and so just saw the vast. I think what's important is like taking a step back and understanding, all right, where, like, if I was always viewing healthcare from a big holistic perspective, and that's honestly how Lightspeed looks at it too. It's not like a particular sector. And when you view healthcare as like a $4 trillion industry, it really shouldn't be viewed like that. It should be viewed as, you got 40, $100 billion industries, or maybe you've got, $140 billion industries. So
Mm,
it's more when you start to breaking down like that, then you start to understand its component parts. And I think that's when I figured, okay, healthcare is not just a doctor treating a patient. That is kind of at the end, or maybe the front end, the end, depending, when you see the patient or when you're treating them. And so having those experiences started to show to me that I wanted to have the bio side, the investing side as part of my career, but I did not know to what degree. I was still thinking I'd be hybrid. And I
mhm,
think the first few years when I could return back in med school while I was doing all these side hustles, I was trying to figure out what kind of hybrid that would be. And frankly, I met, I think, every variation. People like myself now who didn't do residency and just completely working in industry, and then other people who are like 90% physician, 10% consulting. And I see, everything across those. And I asked every one of them, so was that the right kind of career choice, or how do you value it? And every single one thought that their mix was the perfect mix. And so when you hear that from everybody, and of course there's self affirmation, whatever, but these are all like relatively successful, not relatively, very successful, respectful individuals, very insightful, self-aware. And that's when I came to the realization to say, I need to stop hedging. You need to prioritize what you enjoy most.
mm,
What you enjoy most with what you're good at. And I thought I was starting to become good at and understanding the investment and biotech kind of and health tech overlaps, while also really enjoying it. And so it really then became a personal decision rather than trying to hedge. And early grad school, I was still hedging. Like, what's the best way? First generation immigrant, I was still thinking like, what's the most efficient way to an impactful career? And ultimately, it came down to that wise but cliche statement: you got to listen to yourself and see what you enjoy.
yeah, and I think, as you point out, there's a lot of, in many immigrant cases, there's a lack of safety net. At least I can speak for my own. And so there's
Mhm.
also a degree of, are you going to do and pursue the safe thing, quote unquote, or are you going to pursue what you're maybe a little bit more passionate about, take more of a risk and dive into what you enjoy? And as you said, it sounds like you built up a large number of data points before coming to your own decision. So I wouldn't even say you were hedging up front so much as you were collecting more information. And that's not a bad thing.
That's a nice way to put it. After every single one of these conversations, I was just so impressionable, in that time of my learning and everything. I still am. I think we all are in some ways, but
Mm.
but every time I'm like, oh, that's the right mix. And then I thought, oh, that's the right mix. Wait, and then I was like, all right, if I collect them all together, what's the only takeaway? They all did what they enjoyed, whatever mix they enjoyed most. So that was that.
That'd be fun getting them all in a round table arguing their perspective, huh?
I
Cool.
I have had that. That's been my brain. That's the round table. I have them arguing artificially in my brain when I made my decision.
Well, taking this in a slightly different direction, would you give any specific advice, maybe to students going into the MD? or students who are considering the MD and undergrad who might have an interest on the business side? You think they should do some exploration early?
I think I have, at least I have felt the difference of folks who went straight and folks that did not. I think that 1 year, 2 year gap year is very important. 3 years may be unnecessary, but 1 to 2 years, and do it in something very different that you know for sure you're not going to do. Like, don't do it in a, okay, if you want to build a company, and you are more of an entrepreneur type, that's okay to double down on an area of interest and just want to advance your expertise in it to potentially, form a company on it. But if you're more of a, business person, business development, like you're thinking more of potentially as an investor, that is like the path that you want to take, then, for the love of God, do not just do exactly what you did the last 4 years. Do something different. Consulting is obviously a great choice because you do multiple projects. Investing, I still think is, and people say it's difficult to get into. It is, but there are like distinct ways that you can maximize your chances, and most people don't even take those steps. And I can obviously go through those and invite anyone to reach out to me. I think we need more. We need more people that understand the intersection. I am, here at Lightspeed, it's amazing how much freedom, responsibility, and trust they have in us. But there are many funds that are not like that. They just don't get it, and hence they won't deploy those capital. And I'm viewing it as kind of in a systems way that if we do not have enough people that can translate where capital is to where opportunities lie, we're having a dislocation. And just to give you a little bit of how I'm thinking about it is like, biotech is still a really small fund, like a very small circle of funds, very small circle of capital. I say small because relative. If you take all of the biotech stage companies that were public and that lost and you sum up all the value that was lost in the public markets by biotech. I'm excluding pharma. Yeah. You sum all this up in this most recent downturn at its like peak of downturn, they would sum up to be less than the value of the 13th largest pharma company, BMS. So like that's all the like liquid value that got lost eventually, and it'll come up. But that just gives you a sense of scales. Like sometimes when we read the news, we get so stuck in our own heuristics and our own kind of what's it called, echo chamber, that we think like we're really big and we're doing super important things. Well, the fact of the matter is, for the impact that our technologies, our founders, and future founders can have on society, we're still highly underserved. That's my thesis on it.
I mean, if we look at the comparison, right? If we think about the top 3 tech companies, their market cap is the entirety of healthcare, not even biotech, healthcare. So yeah, I'm right there with you. Especially considering the value healthcare gives to the world.
That I did not see. Oh, thank you for going even one step above. That's a good one.
Yeah. No, but okay. So while we're on the topic then, and you talked about this, do you have any advice for those individuals who might be earlier in their careers and seeking to pursue either venture or entrepreneurship?
Absolutely. I have a call like this almost every week with someone that reaches out. I take almost every call that comes out. Just, sometimes it takes me a while to reply, but be persistent. That's, I guess, step one, be persistent. But I think
this morning, right there with you. I think one of the great things about people in healthcare is that we all want to give back, and we all want to do so in a positive way and support others. And so, yes, I very much strongly recommend the persistence, because we might be busy and it might take us a minute, but we really want to be there for you.
Yes, I love that, Chris. I think also what you guys are doing with Alix and BIOS in particular, you are providing a platform that I think enables people to at least hear these stories. So honestly, you're doing a great service to the community. So keep up what you guys are doing. So advice. My first advice, besides persistence, that's like constant, is give before you take. And what I mean by that is, like, this is what I did myself, and it really helped me, I think, have productive conversations. Is when I would reach out to someone and I didn't have a connection, obviously try to get a warm connection. But if you cannot, that first conversation, that first email needs to be about giving rather than taking. And what is that like? What form does that take? That often, the way I did it was find an area that you're going to be read up on a little bit more. Honestly, it doesn't have to be much, 4 or 5 slides, interesting slides that are updated, so it's relatively new, and on particular topic, and then reach out to someone who's got even relevant tangential interest and just say, hey, by the way, this is an area I'm very interested in. Here's some 4 or 5 slides that I think is very interesting. I would break that up into what's new, what are the big companies doing, here are 2 interesting startups. I'd love to take your opinion on it, your thoughts. And all of a sudden now it's about, first of all, you're already giving, you're sharing information. And us VCs, we think we're experts, but honestly, we're like very shallow on most areas until we have to do diligence, right? Like a company comes in, then we become like pretty wise on something. But until then, a undergrad spending, a couple of weeks researching an area will actually often be a little deeper than what most VCs can do are at first value. So that means trust you can bring value even like at the early stages. And then when you do that, like the conversation becomes more of like the people know you're giving the effort, and then it's less of an ask and more of let's have a discussion. And once you're having a discussion on a particular topic, they're viewing you as a colleague, as a source of value, rather than what kind of advice should I be giving them, so on and so forth. So that's my that's my first thing. And I think the second biggest is make yourself known. Like roles in venture, private equity, biotech, these areas are so opaque, and most of the time they get filled without you even knowing, which means that you have to ensure that funds are aware of you. And there's a little even process I take there. Like if you meet someone, let's say you have that first conversation, never should 4 to 5 months pass that you don't send an update email to them. Don't ask them anything, not like, oh, let's get another copy. Many people don't have that time, but at the end of the first conversation, say this, hey, so-and-so, thank you so much. It was a great conversation. Do you mind if I send you occasional updates here and then? No one's going to say, no, don't send me updates. And that's ridiculous. And so what happens is by the end of a year, 2 years, you might have had 4 or 5 different points of interaction just by email, light. But when you do need to make that big ask, hey, I want to get a role, or I want to do something. I'm ready to switch over from this to this. That person would have a sense of connection to you that is quite high based upon the effort that you've done. Like the ROI on that time for you is really good. Repeat that 10 times, 15 times, 20 times, and you're setting yourself up for real shot at getting a role in investing in biotech, health tech. I think if you do that, it's actually pretty solid chances.
I'm going to strongly second that. I have not applied for a role since 2017, and I've been lucky through these conversations, through having a network that admittedly I've spent probably over a decade at this point building. Those conversations come, and it comes because someone recommends you, you have a conversation, or people are aware of who you are. And so it sounds like similarly, you can't apply, you can't be considered if you're not known. So making yourself known is important. Agreed. And let's take this in a slightly different direction, but on the topic of making yourself known, why Lightspeed?
Yeah, no, for sure. So for me, I would say Lightspeed essentially goes for, I was looking for a combination of things. If you recall, when I made the decision not to do residency, I was like, all right, let me set up a list of funds, and I had, a nice list of funds. And I actually, frankly, Lightspeed wasn't initially on the list because I didn't know they did much healthcare. I was interning at DCVC with Scott Barkley there, James Hardiman, great group, love those guys. I was spending a summer there, and I thought there was a deal that I was about to like close in on, and I thought, man, this would be great, summer internship, get a deal done, it should be good. And then the founder, which was a GSB founder where I was at, he comes back to me and says, hey, Galym, we're going to take the term sheet from Lightspeed. And I said, wait a second, you guys are healthcare. Who's doing healthcare at Lightspeed? And so, one thing led to the next. I finally got the introduction to Jonathan. Jonathan, by his email, said, hey, I'll give you 15 minutes and we can chat on the phone. I said, okay, all right, 15 minutes. I can already sense this is just going to be a nice, a quick little chat, and that's it. So 15 minutes starts, and within a minute, Jonathan tells me, all right, Galym, here's what you need to do. Go to Genentech, work there for 4 years, and come back to me after 4 years and we'll talk. And I said, oh man. And I was upfront with it. I said, no, I don't want to do that. I said, here's I want to be an investor. I've already been an investor. Here are the things I like. Here are the things I'm thinking about. And I didn't even know where this was going to head. Anyway, the 15 minutes turns into 45 minutes. Thankfully, he was gracious with his time. And one thing led to the next. And they were, I didn't know, but they were thinking about, building out a team. And so I think I was actually the first partner hire there. And then shortly thereafter, Shelly, Jonathan became head of the fund and all head of the team. And so, and Ling was an advisor before that. So it all formalized there. So, anyway, that's a little backstory of how it all came to be. Because sometimes I feel like it's important to share these things. I share it not to just like say how it happened, more like these are examples so that people who actually want to do this know that this is real. There's a lot of serendipity. There's a lot of weird idiosyncrasy. Sometimes you do everything right and it doesn't happen. Sometimes you don't do much right and it happens. It's like so. You got to increase your shots.
Stubbornness and persistence, like you were talking about earlier. I love how within the first start of the conversation was, go do something else, and then you're like, no, this is how I'm thinking, and it's a great example of what I like to tell founders in VC, which is a no is very rarely a finalized no. Most of the time, it's a follow up with me or explain to me why I'm wrong. We like being challenged on our assumptions, and we like people who have a little bit of that stubborn streak and who can demonstrate to us, because like you've said, we might be a mile wide and an inch deep, but if you're an inch wide and a mile deep and you can explain to us why our thinking is wrong, we love that.
Totally on board. No, awesome. Exactly. So great. Yeah. So that's kind of the mini story there. But okay, so then why Lightspeed? The things I was prioritizing personally for myself one was vision alignment. After being at Capricorn, being at med school, doing a lot of research in terms of funds, I was looking at like what funds do, like what's the performance of funds, who are the ones that did really well, what's some underlying things that people are kind of missing, and what's the landscape. And ultimately, I came to the conclusion, and I may be wrong because it's probably really hard to execute, we'll see, but that you have to have flexibility of stage and flexibility of sector within healthcare. I strongly believe that having a multi-stage, multi-sector approach in healthcare will yield you the long-term repeatable returns that you want. And I needed a group that ascribed to that, and that kind of took out a lot of pure biotechs, pure digital health. I didn't want to do those. Like I felt like I needed some place that had that flexibility. There's a few funds out there that have that, and Lightspeed certainly fit the bill. Second, so first was vision. Second was learning. Like I was, just graduating grad school. I felt really confident in my abilities because I had done investing before. I knew how the investment process works, how to analyze, how to do kind of the technical things, term sheets, things like that. But I needed to. I still felt like, look, you got to be a lifetime learner. And in VC, I still feel like the master apprentice approach holds value. Some people don't think so. I have felt when I had my interactions with Jonathan McQuitty, who has, decades of experience both being a founder, building, investing, and just a tremendous track record, I found someone who could take me under their wing and show me the ropes and with whom I could learn on a rapid, quick basis. And so that was number two. It was very evident for me that I would have that champion. And then three was responsibility. And this one is about, you have to gauge yourself as an individual to say, hey, am I ready to take on, like, I'm going to lead a whole deal myself? Sometimes the answer should be no, which means, hey, let me go to a fund where they do a bunch of deals, and I might not be at the partner level. I might be like, I'll start a little bit lower, but I'll get through a lot of deals. And then 2-3 years there is going to serve you way better than going somewhere where you have high responsibility, but you don't have those reps. And so it's more of like a bet on yourself. Not a bet is like, if you don't take a bet, it's bad. It's more like, be self-aware. Are you ready to go ahead, lead deals? And I felt like I needed to be in a place where I had that higher responsibility. Of course, it's a team decision. We all talk about it, but like, can you lift that and take on that kind of that level of responsibility? And Lightspeed had that too. So those three things overlapped really, really well, and that's why I went with them.
Oh, and the timing, I suspect, was right. As you said, they were just starting to build out the bio side. So let's talk a little bit further about Lightspeed. And your mission there is to serve the world's most extraordinary people who are building tomorrow's companies today. gotten from the website. So tell us a little bit
Yep.
more about this mission, and especially as we talk about the healthcare space, what does it mean to you?
Yeah. So I think the mission, the way I've internalized it, is my first conversation with Ravi Matre, who is the remaining founder of the firm, is uh, who leads all of Lightspeed now. And when I met him for the first time, it was very clear that the message was swinging for the fences. That where I was my previous fund, you go for double or triple. It's pretty good, well risk. You got downside protection and all these things. Like the concept of downside protection almost went out the window here. It's like, no, you're not going to hedge. You're going to swing for the fence. Yes, sometimes you get a double, triple. That's all fine. That's good. That's how portfolios are overall built. But each opportunity that you go for needs to have the size of impact that could be, fund returner. Okay, when now Lightspeed has 7 billion in funds, that's a little different of an equation. So obviously you have to caveat with that. But overall, these need to be large, large, large bets. And that required actually some calibration. Like not every investor is ready for that. Many investors kind of like the idea of like, all right, what's my downside protection? If I get my 2 to 3x or 3 to 4x, I'm good. It's not the same here. And I think Lightspeed has continued to be successful in terms of its returns while maintaining that. And you'd think at some point they would begin to compromise a bit, and but they haven't. Yes, we do have additional vehicles now. It's not just an early stage fund. We have a growth stage fund, which technically has a different, return expectation. But still, even the growth stage fund is a venture growth. This is not like, we're going to do private equity and try to grow, 15% a year type of thing. So that I would say that's kind of encapsulates to me the mission and kind of, I guess, the ambition more than anything.
Yeah, and it's a strong one. So let's build on that and talk a little bit more, I guess, about your own mission, if we can use that word. You've said previously that you believe the term healthcare should be shortened to just health. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how the mindset you're espousing aligns with the broader Lightspeed mission as well?
Yes, yes. Maybe I'll answer that in reverse. So health is so critical. I mean, look, that's it is, it's Lightspeed's got enterprise, consumer, health, fintech. So if you like look at just the names of it, it's like enterprise is the infrastructure to make sure society runs. Consumer is to make sure that we interact with each other well and that we either potentially entertain each other well. Fintech is kind of another variation of this, and then health is fundamental to make sure we live healthy lives. So it's like it fits within the Lightspeed big ambition. That's like check, we're good. It didn't make sense to go like, all right, all these big sectors, and now we're just going to do biotech. It's like we're limiting ourselves by labels, and this gets to my main kind of point about why health rather than healthcare. Like I have this love-hate relationship with labels. Especially as an immigrant, Muslim immigrant from Kazakhstan, it's like labels have so much power to destroy opportunities for bridging on a cultural level. I think it applies very similarly in an industry practical level as well. So when we say healthcare, you think, oh, hospitals, primary care, go to the doctor, things like that. No, like at the end of the day, we're trying to improve health. If you go to it's like its main primitive, from there you can go ahead and find things. So for us, our team's motto is like if we impact patient health, like well enough, everything else downstream, like we should be able to make a good return. And it happens to be that biotech is a good avenue. There's a few areas in health tech that are a good avenue, but impacting patient health. And I know you guys' line is like perfect like that too. So I think that's underlying. But really, I think it's about that healthcare to health is to make sure we challenge our heuristics, make sure we're not ascribing to labels, go to the underlying first principles primitives, and then from there you can go ahead and live in the reality that we do have to have certain labels to make sense of the world. But I just do that as a way to challenge our thinking.
I really like that. That's something where, as you say, sometimes, especially in an industry like biopharma, biotech, health, healthcare, whatever term we do want to use, and I think all can be applicable for different segments, we can be a bit traditionally minded and challenging ourselves in our labels to challenge our thinking every once in a while good reminder for all of us. So let's take a step back, and you talked about this a bit before. Enterprise began on the Lightspeed began on the enterprise side back in 2009. The firm quickly realized the impact data can have in healthcare, and so they began investing more in the bioinformatics space, as you said, and they started to invest and explore into traditional biopharma. And then in around 2020, Lightspeed really doubled down on its healthcare and life sciences focus, which is where you became a partner at the firm after as you wrapped up your MD MBA. And so, as a partner who joined at this time, can you tell us a little bit more about Lightspeed's dedication and effort in health?
Yeah. That's a great question. One of the questions I had was like, so how much is being allocated here? Because we don't have a dedicated fund. We're more aligned to some of these other funds where like you just like it's less recent bio. We don't have a dedicated fund. We invest from the core a set of funds, and the good thing is. Again, the message from the top, which is it's really important that leadership, particularly in a fund that does so many other things and that health is a new effort, that you get that buy-in. And basically the message was, we'll let you know if you over deploy. And last fund we almost comprised almost 20% of the invested capital from the early stage fund, and so that is that's really healthy when the denominator is so big. So we're not concerned about
the new segment of the fund itself.
Yeah. So I think I mentioned about how much we've dedicated. So it's a big chunk now. It's not like a middling kind of effort to the side. And just also in terms of, so I'll give you the percentage of the fund, and in terms of count, I think we have invested into 14 like therapeutics biotech companies in the last year and a half. So and maybe that's one thing I could talk about is our dedicated effort like within where. So like majority of our portfolio has been more on the therapeutics. We do a good amount of health tech as well. We've done some diagnostics. We're looking into other areas of intersections like decentralized clinical trials. We're looking at various real world data situations, looking at a lot of infrastructure problems as well. But the majority of our portfolios is still very scientifically heavy, very therapeutics heavy.
No, absolutely. I mean, I would love to dive a little bit deeper and understand more. You just described a few of them, but how you think about investment theses in health and the life sciences. Sort of maybe what a few of them are, how they're selected, and how do you? I recognize and you were saying this earlier. Lightspeed is very multi-stage and very multi-sector, as you talk about a number of different investments across more traditional therapeutics into health tech and infrastructure. But would love to, I guess, get a deeper understanding of how Lightspeed and the health team within Lightspeed thinks about where to invest and what to explore, because I recognize those areas are probably constantly being updated.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the challenge when you state and try to practice a multi-stage, multi-sector situation is, those things fluctuate. It's the challenge, but it's also the advantage. When something is not looking that great in a particular area, you can move around. And it doesn't mean that we're reactionary. Sometimes we're actually doing the opposite. A market goes one way, we go head on to the areas that are difficult, and so but that allows us the flexibility. So how we think, particularly with the audience here, right, in regards to therapeutics investment, building life science, tech, bio opportunities, for us, we view it through a number of risks, like essentially categories. One is, what's the platform risk? Like essentially, like is this a platform technology from which many things can be built, or is this like an asset play? By the way, we do both. Most of our things have platforms, but we are not shy from situations where you don't need a bunch of data. It's a really good asset. You got an interesting team, and there's all this. So it's more of what fits the right strategy. So we have certain situations where we find the right asset pickers, and we team that up with a platform. We team it up with the management team, and we find a sector that we know pharma is very dedicated and interested in. So that is a little bit more traditional, probably biotech investing. But then we have deals. The majority of our deals in therapeutics have been in the Series A land, and they're really large raises. And that's one of the things like we do for sure is like when we invest, it needs to be able to capitalize a really key milestone. We do a number of seed investments too, but oftentimes it's that Series A that gets you to a milestone that we feel comfortable about. You'll find a lot of investors, particularly in the last, maybe 3-4 years, they went ahead and invested into a lot of platform technology. So it's like, all right, there's a lot of enabling tech that's been built, but oftentimes these companies are 3-4 years away from an IND. And we want to be a little bit closer to that value inflection point to clinic. Part of it is because of our team. We have deep, technology expertise, but we are really heavy also on the clinical side. And that is a differentiator for us. So I think some firms, like, even though you look at Lightspeed and health and you'll think, oh, that's like a tech bio, like it totally makes sense. I would actually view us as a team that has a lot of traditional biotech expertise, but has the flexibility and the appreciation of tech bio platforms. So therefore, like, even like, again, these labels, right? What's tech bio is biotech. I still like to use the term biotech. I know it might be anathema here, but I use that because what comes first? To me, I still feel like bio comes first, tech comes later to support it. And so the order of the sub words within that label, I think, to me, matters. But we've seen now plenty of examples where the tech is really good, and then you can latch on capable, strong folks who can develop the bio part of it, develop the right pathophysiology to target, so on and so forth. But I find that it really obviously has to be both. And most of the time, I think it's the latter. That's how we think. So anyway, there's platform risk. Obviously, we look at financing risk to make sure the financing gets us to the right milestone. Just mentioned that. Management is something that's tricky, right? If you have a management that's really good and well known, there's certain things you can check off because the systems that they make their decisions on. If it's a new team, so people who are listening to this who are like, all right, hey, I'm relatively new, I'm not that plugged into the network, but I have like pretty good technology. It just increases a little bit more burden on you to prove certain areas that can overcome that. I won't be sitting here and think like, I wouldn't tell you like we look at, I think it's important for first-time founders to have that reality check, to know that you're going to be scrutinized more, just simply out of the human nature of following patterns. Again, heuristics, right? But in this case, in order to a position, it's either got to be the data or your clarity of vision. Oftentimes, it's like the data is good, but the person just can't get us on board to understand like how are things 2 years from now. It's either like what's today and I can't tell you anything further, or it's today and I can tell you where this company's 10 years from now. It's like, okay, like 10 years from now, hopefully we're all alive, right? Climate change type of thing. It's like, tell me what's
talk about that later.
Yeah, it's like what's happening in 2 years when your platform will be developed to a certain point. How are you going to recruit the former CSO of Fortune 100 pharma company? Like that's the kind of thinking. And when we challenge them and when people have strong answers to those, like tactical answers, then that confidence goes up. So that's on management. And then finally, this is a little bit more technical, but like target and modality risk, right? It's when we're less likely to take target risk, more likely to take modality risk. So we want to try new modalities going after validated targets more often than not. We'll definitely be open to new targets, but it's just a different level of risk tolerance for us.
And that makes sense as well. But let's even take it a step further. And as you've described, Lightspeed invests across stages. You'll occasionally be first money in, going all the way up through growth into crossover rounds. And on top of that, you also have global reach with a presence and access to resources across Silicon Valley, Israel, China, India, Europe, and Southeast Asia. And so given you invest across so many of these stages as you described, and in so many different geographies around the world, how do you differentiate the fund, but also develop the domain expertise to support it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We rely a lot on our network of like already kind of having sourcing opportunities that have a lot of credibility. We're also a fund that we do some incubation ourselves, like 47 in some ways was. Jonathan was the founding CEO. D2G Oncology also is an incubation. We've been kind of seeding this company for some time, but we know our constraints. We're a small team. And so we're going to be investing into formed teams more often than not. So I would say we're very founder friendly in that regard. We're not going to turn you, the founder, into a project manager. Frankly, there are some very well-regarded funds out there, which we love and respect a lot because of all the things, the progress that they have done, their longevity in the industry, the talent pool they've created by their funding. But there's a level of them turning founders into project managers that we don't like. This is where the Lightspeed distinction comes. Like, Lightspeed influences us in some ways to say the founder is the central guy or woman. The man or woman there is going to lead this. Okay, sometimes it makes sense to bring in a different CEO, but like, we very much view them as central. They need to be rewarded for it appropriately, and we expect them to have a central point in it, because that continues to reap a lot of rewards down the line as well. So we do not want to make you guys project managers. The founder is gonna be a real founder, and so that's I think for us. Now, to talk to your point about like global, I'll give you a couple examples. So Ultimate Genomics, which finally came out of stealth at over $3 billion valuation, we seeded that at the seed level. But how did that come up to be? That was a multi-office operation. We had one of our partners, Ioni from Israel, had the founder relationship, and then Jonathan from our side, this is before my time, he and Yoni teamed up with, on one hand, you got the regional network and connection, and personal relationship, and then you've got the expertise. We came that together, and we were able to lead to co-lead the seed in that round with Khosla. And so that's a good example. Another example where I'm currently on the board of a company called Cureless Therapeutics. This was a situation where you have a fund called Catalyst Pacific that's led by an American who lives in Japan, and invests in primarily Japanese opportunities, but he builds companies that oftentimes leverage Japanese assets, really good chemistry, really good teams there, and pairs them up with good development teams and maybe financing in the West to kind of and to progress these further. So that's another situation where we're working globally. Honestly, good science is everywhere. It's just the good science doesn't quite advance in different stages. So as long as you can solve for stage dislocation, then we can have some unique opportunities there, and everyone wins in those settings.
Oh, and it sounds like you do, as you mentioned, quite a lot of engagement with the founders, and obviously you're trying to be a value add to them, but give them that opportunity to still hold the reins, which I've always liked to say, as a VC, our role is to be there for you. And so we'll be your cheerleaders, we'll be your support, we'll offer that sort of insight and hopefully connection as you need it. But this is your company, you're the technologist, we're here to help. So
yeah,
I love that description.
Yes, not everyone shares that, Chris. There's many funds that don't share that view, and they've been successful for it. So there's it's just a different. It's a different thinking about it, and it works in many ways, and sometimes it doesn't. And we've chosen to go the route that, hey, we'll build things for sure, but we are going to be more of the investor type that we're going to be supporting.
Yeah. No, and as you pointed out, there are certainly instances where there's a reason there is a board and they can act as a check. And I think WeWork comes to mind for everyone, given the news out about Flow yesterday. But taking that more on track and building a little bit on those differentiators you just described, can you tell us how you consider diligence at Lightspeed? How do you really separate the signal from the noise when you're considering companies right off the bat?
Yeah, I think the reality is, having experienced management, or at least some of the team that comes from experience in the area that you're actually raising for, is probably one of the biggest signals. There have been too many situations where it's like a really strong team that has built out a particular platform but don't have the right expertise to take it to the next level, and they want us to invest at that point. That's a tough time. That's a tough place. I think founders have to prove that they can find that expertise, and to convince them, because once that's on board, then all of a sudden this becomes a very different conversation. People, I think, generally, ourselves included, rather not take a lot of management risk on the key areas. Again, different stage, different expectations, right?
Hmm.
But I think that's the first piece. And then when it goes into the science, I mean, we're a small team, but we dig in pretty deep. We understand, all right, you're going after this target. How many others are there? Okay, you're building this really interesting technology, which means you're gonna get a differentiated asset. And sometimes I see they say, oh yeah, and here's what's happening in the landscape will be not first in class or whatever. They'll be like a good copycat, but it'll be a little better. But then we'll say like, no, 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 like we're investing in what happens in 2026 here. So show me the world in 2026. And if your technology is best in class now or has potential, where will it be when in 2026 you're going to have modalities that'll be cheaper? They might be a little bit, they might not be that much better, but they'll be a little bit better, or maybe they even be a little bit worse, but they'll be 10 times cheaper. Sometimes I think about the world of cell therapies and bispecifics in that realm too. It's like, all right, if you can achieve something for in the tens of thousands versus hundreds of thousands, where do we think the world will be when drug pricing conversations are happening how they are, and 4 years down the line, a value-based pricing is probably going to have more meat on its bones. So it's I think, and that goes to the diligence part about clarity of vision. If the founders cannot articulate how every year how this company is going to mature and how the world is going to be reacting, it might not happen that way. But having an opinion is very important.
No, and it also gives you
Um,
that opportunity
yeah,
to go in clear-eyed, right? So that way,
yeah,
when you're moving forward, if something does change from your expectations, at least you're thinking about it and you have a little bit of information so you can react more promptly.
yeah, yeah. And the rest of the diligence is frankly very standard. We find out. We go through the diligence materials. We ask you a bunch of questions on the asset, on the platform. IP is really important for us. We engage expert opinions sometimes. We get consultants to help us out, um, and all of that. And then at the end of that, I think one thing I want to also leave an impression is that founders and investors too, like our interaction that we have is such an interesting one, but it's not a one-shot game. Like that's the most important thing, to like do not optimize for the one shot, or do not let emotions get to a point that you treat this as a one-shot game. Sometimes, I mean, this happens very rarely, but I don't know how the founders, like I could imagine the founder would feel pretty crummy that we spent a lot of time and then we decided not to invest. And it's disappointing, but the best reaction that I've seen are people who respond like this is a continuing conversation, and they'll be appreciative of the time we spent, but they'll also won't be afraid to say, well, here's why I think we'll still get it right, but they do it in a courteous way. I actually kind of like that.
Yeah.
And and I say I'll say something like, we're going to be cheering you on the sidelines. Like, of course we're going to cheer that this works. There's probably one or two areas that just didn't quite click to the level we needed to, but we're going to cheer for you. And the good thing is, we're not a seed stage only fund. We're not a fund that only incubates. We're a multi-stage fund. So
Mhm.
there's actually not that many of us. There's a few. So if we are truly multi-stage, you should be treating a conversation with Lightspeed as, all right, let's get this first one, and if we can get the investment now, great. If it doesn't make sense, let's optimize how the next conversation is. And that is just, and we're early in this process, so that's starting just to come out now, right? We're about a year and a half, and I'm seeing some founders that have done that well, and other founders who really I wish they did it because I want them, and I reach out to them myself, but it's just not as optimal. They don't update me, and so I start to lose interest, and then there's bandwidth constraints and things, and normal life gets in the way. So
No, and it goes back to some of the things we were saying earlier, and some of the advice you were even giving to those who are exploring VC
yeah,
exploring getting into VC or private equity or investing more broadly or biotech or pharma. When you have a conversation, never view it as a firm no, and at the same time, always end the conversation as if it's continuing. Ask if you can reach out. Ask if you can provide updates. And in a situation like this, when you're an entrepreneur, ask for what are the milestones you'd love to see us complete by the next round. So that
yeah.
way, when we follow up, we can say, we've addressed your concerns and we're ready to move the conversation forward. So I love that message. It's one of optimism, and you're right. I think entrepreneurs are quite rightly attached to their ideas and their companies. By the same token, It's not meant to be a negative reflection on you. The
Mhm.
conversation's still open. So
Absolutely. I think, it's I know it's easy for us to say it, right? Um, I can imagine it's not easy for the founder. And I
yeah,
empathize with that. And I think it's important to know that, we're here humans on the other side too. And like we have a lot of empathy, at least some of us I feel do. And we try to do our best. And we're gonna get it wrong too. And so I hope there's empathy on the other side when somebody I passed on does really well and they're like, not that you made a mistake. It's like, oh, you did the best decision you could at that time with the data that we had. I mean, that's
yeah,
really ultimately what it comes down to. And if you think of yourselves as like, human to human, partner to partner, with all of our flaws and our ability to digest everything, that's how it is. And then it becomes really not a power dynamic thing. It's more about let's find a way to make this work over
yeah,
a period of
exactly.
time.
And all of us VCs we chat, we're doing it right now. So if there's not strong necessarily alignment for one company, ideally you recognize that, appreciate their time, and say if you do have any friends who you might recommend me to, please do let me know. I'm happy to have
Yep.
any conversations you think are relevant. And so let's let's take it a step forward. And
Yeah.
as you described, you and your team have made some really phenomenal investments into companies like Orca Bio and 47, Teneo Bio and Garden Health, Coryllis Therapeutics, D2G Oncology, Natera, could go on. And so while it's unreasonable, it may be an unreasonable question, given these companies really span the breadth of the healthcare industry. Do you have an archetype or archetypes of founders you look for? We've mentioned you appreciate
Yeah.
having individuals on the team with a bit of seniority and experience, maybe not necessarily from the beginning, but at later stage milestones. So, taking it a step back and talking about the founders,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, if I had to put all our founders in one room, I mean, I think you'd find a really, really eclectic. It'll be an interesting party, but
One I'd
man, it'll
love to
be
be
hard.
invited to.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, I'll let you know. But I feel like it's gonna be hard to pick out, something and in an immediate like sense. From like what I think the again like this goes to my whole thing about archetypes, right? It's like in heuristics is like, gosh darn, like you need archetypes in order to develop some level of efficiency to like
Mhm.
in the future to find those archetypes. But then the archetypes also have the flaw that you're gonna miss someone who doesn't fit that. And I think we err on the side of the latter, meaning let's not have an archetype. Let's find what makes sense for the problem, what kind of founder makes sense for the problem that's being solved. So I'll give you two examples. One is, well, a segment, like let's say therapeutics. So therapeutics is like data is paramount. It speaks any language through any accent, through any location that data speaks. So there's certain things in therapeutics that like we don't have to have the archetype of a salesperson. Maybe on the IPO, sure, we'll get some communicator that can do that. Obviously, it's still helpful for someone who's a very good communicator and does all that. That's all else being equals way better, but it's not it's not a deal killer. Yeah, it will, and I don't think it'll ever be in a situation where it's strong science and it's very data driven. But now let's take the example of like Garden Health, diagnostics, still very technical. The founder is technical, but the founder leveraged resources, his own thinking, and others that he had to redefine an entire sector of diagnostics. The term liquid biopsy, by the way, was popularized by Garden Health. Before them, that term didn't exist.
Mhm.
So sometimes, like if you're going to change a way a sector is viewed, you're going to have certain skill sets and certain archetypal characteristics to be bold enough to say, I'm going to freaking name a whole new category, and everyone's going to follow it, and we have. Right. So I think, whereas like a therapeutics person doesn't need to do that right from the get-go. Um, but it certainly helps. I mean, we've all known certain people raise massive rounds off of very little data, and that's salesmanship, that's pedigree. There's various things that go along with that. But I like to say, our group, you put them all together, they're all gonna look different, they're gonna speak differently, and we love that. So no archetype, I would say.
Oh, that's great to hear. And do you have any recommendations then for these founders who are reaching out to Lightspeed?
Yes, I mean, I think it's important to do the research. So like if you're going to reach out to me, I would hope you look at the portfolio. You maybe listen to a segment of this to understand like, does this fit? Because if it doesn't fit, you might want to position the pitch differently. It's like, hey, I'd like to meet you. We're not quite there at the area you're most likely ready for, but I want to familiarize you with the situation. I take those meetings like very often because I'm like, okay, thanks. And it's so good. It's like no pressure or anything. We have a nice conversation and you're going to be ready in like 6 months, maybe a year, something like that. But for the things that you think is ready for prime time, I think getting a good introduction from somebody. It doesn't have to be another investor. It could be it could be a faculty member. It could be anyone that's somewhat. I think reaching out cold is fine, but just like make the email be like have that hook in the beginning that makes sense, that's relevant, things like that. I mean, it's kind of basics. I don't have any like particularly, I think, novel ideas on this one.
No, wasn't expecting you to template out a cold email for our listeners today, but I appreciate you starting to even give some thoughts there. And let's pivot that slightly, but keep the conversation going around support, because I'd love to dive deeper into Lightspeed support for founders and companies. And so, what at Lightspeed does being a good partner to your portfolio companies mean?
Yeah. Um, uh, we have a lot of interesting resources, but I'll spare you on that. I'll just say one sentence on that is like we have founder success team that is very helpful at every stage of the company, like from the very beginning, how to incorporate these things, IP, various things that we can connect you to. We don't always like lead those things, but like talent, we have 4 members on the talent team who were all executive search firm partners at firms. So there's a lot of internal things, but I won't share. I think those are all very helpful. But the thing is, I think the most important thing else to say is not every investor or fund is aligned with the founder at all times. And almost no fund is aligned 100% of the time. But Lightspeed comes really close to 100%. And that is because, again, the multi-stage, multi-sector investment profile that we have, the fact that our funds have an early stage fund, a growth stage fund, a late growth stage fund. My first deal at Lightspeed was, I thought I was going to come here to do VC investing. My first deal at Lightspeed was a PIPE. It was an investment in a public company that was already a portfolio of ours, which goes to show we invested into this company. This is Personalis. We invested in 2011, never sold a share, bought in the IPO, bought post-IPO. So there's when a lot of people lost faith, but why? At the end, we're aligned with like any other Series A investor. When we get to IPO, unlike a lot of early stage investors, we don't have to sell at that point. We could, sometimes we do, but if we believe the venture story continues, we don't. Then we have our growth stage funds. At the IPO, we actually put in more money, and then after, the company might have some ups and downs in terms of public valuation. Maybe there's like a product evolution that's happening. We are not like crossovers that are going to support. We know a lot of crossovers. We have a lot of friends in the tech bio space that are crossovers, but most of them sell within a year because they need to get that IRR. That's just their business. There's no fault against them. That's just what they need to do. We don't have to do that. Our fund, again, at Lightspeed, thankfully, I mean, I feel very privileged that the funds have done so well from a return perspective that the LPs essentially say, guys, you can cross over to other funds, you can do things like that, as long as we're diligent about making sure the venture story and the return profile makes sense. And so we're very clear, we're very strict on that, but we have that capability, and so few funds do. And so I think in that sense, we are really aligned on almost every single point of the journey. And that is something that I will say is the number one thing, aside from all the other support thing you have. When you have me on the board, my teammates on the board, you can feel assured there's not going to be that extraneous pressures that can sometimes go against the founder. I think that just gives them so much relief. And we become a natural confidant because we're literally on the same page. So
and that's huge. And it sounds like you really make sure that alignment exists from the beginning because, as you've said, when you're getting involved with a company, especially at an early stage, especially for the long term, it's a long-term relationship. These are not short-term companies. And so as we think about that, and as we think about founder support and these lengthy life cycle for visionary companies, especially those in the life sciences, health tech, healthcare, and we think about building and supporting teams and cultures, doing this with intention, especially from the beginning, can often be critical. especially in areas like tech bio, where we're seeing increasing interdisciplinarity of different cultures and you have to meld them together. So you've talked a lot about supporting founders and being aligned. How do you think about doing so from that team building and company culture perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this is where groups like you come in handy. So, one thing I guess we should include you on the cap table more in more future rounds. I
Always
think you
happy to
guys
have a
have
conversation, Galym.
things. I mean, I think the first thing is we're a small team within a very large platform, so we have capital. We can support with capital. We've got our founder success team. We can do a lot of things on talent, things I mentioned. But I think I have to also be realistic that these are syndicates, and it's more
Mhm.
like as a founder and as usually when we help the founder through this process, like you've got real estate. Like let's say you've got $80 million round, you got real estate. Let's allocate that real estate to the things that you need. It's almost like a college application, let's say. You got like this part is going to make sure I've got a good capital partner for the long term. This chunk of money is going to make sure I'm going to have access to this clinical advisory group. This is going to be make sure I have a really good technologist that can help on the data infrastructure side, right? And that is, I think, how it's best done. And we can coordinate a lot of that, partly because we have a lot of that in-house, but we can kind of help make sure the syndicate does all their parts as well. Because usually we're the lead in
Yeah,
most rounds.
that makes a lot of sense. And taking that in a slightly different direction and having maybe a little bit more specifically into an area of interest for both of us. A point of particular focus and importance today has been around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and quite rightly. And so, given, and I hope you don't mind me calling this out, but I mean, your background as an immigrant and the fact that you see and support companies sometimes from the earliest stages, in addition to the resources we were just describing, do you have any thoughts on how we as VCs can support founders, can maybe influence syndicate partners to think
Mhm.
about DE&I in regards to team building, especially when talking about backing people of immigrant or maybe first generation background?
Absolutely. It's so important, and I hate that it's still going at a very slow pace. The people who are most affected by this, yeah, it's going at a slow pace, and really we need to do a better job of it as an industry. I am though happy to say that Lightspeed is very proud. We address this on multiple angles. First thing is like let's put our money where let's put our mouth where our money is. I forget what the right order of these things are. These idioms sometimes do give me. So we have, for example, a scout program at Lightspeed, and it's all for underrepresented minorities. And we actually give them capital to deploy on their behalf. They get real economics. They get carry on the capital we provide to them, and they go out and find really interesting opportunities. They check it with us. We make sure that it's makes sense. But we're pretty collaborative and liberal to make sure they have a lot of agency. And so we provide them the skill set to essentially the skill set and the actual capital to act as not just an advisor, not just a scout. Hey, here's the deal. No, this is your money. Go ahead and invest.
That's
So
amazing.
it's quite amazing. We have some really talented people on the scout team. From folks, Terrence from on the East Coast. We got Anandi, that's a Genentech. I mean, we have like these are folks who are like at their careers, whether they're founding or this, and they just need that additional potential exposure that will help them. And I'm just so proud that we're doing that. We also have entire efforts on building diverse boardrooms because oftentimes that's a great
Hmm.
opportunity to bring an independent that because sometimes we're like realistically we're still hindered by our history as a society, right? So all of these like funds that we're all a part of, naturally there's going to be this lag of adoption. It's happening, which is great. So how do you accelerate that? Well, what about independent seats, and how do we make sure those are filled in a thoughtful manner? So I think we're doing a lot on these efforts, and then obviously it all comes down to a personal. It has to be like me at the board level saying, "Hey guys, how are we thinking about this? Our criteria needs to include this." So I think we're actually doing actions. We're not just speaking it, and so we just got to keep doing it.
No, I love to hear that. Mm. And so, as we think about this, and as we think about companies you've invested in, companies you've supported, we've talked about some great ones today, and I know it can be impossible to choose, but I wanted to provide the opportunity Are there any others you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage people to look at the website. A lot of interesting work. The one that I've been spending some time on that I'm very excited about is a company called D2G Oncology. And it is, well, there's several. Yeah, choosing so hard. But D2G Oncology is one that's a spin-off from Stanford. We've been seeing it for some time. There's not much information about it publicly, but I'll just kind of give a high level. It's an in vivo model that can produce in vitro level throughput of data and insights. It's really, I think, going to be able to find ways to interrogate genotypes to drugs. That's basically, drugs to genotype. That's where the D2G comes from, and how to interrogate that in a level of statistical significance never ever before seen. And what that's going to enable us to do is to essentially find drugs that didn't do very well from phase 1 to phase 2, or somewhere along the line didn't quite succeed, and enrich patient populations very precisely to ensure that these drugs can essentially have another life and be able to have the efficacy at much better precision. Like this is literally the most, when people say precision medicine by targeted therapies, I think this is going to take it to a next level. This is going to be 2.0 in terms of capability of insights. There have been a number of companies that have gone it from like a human data angle only, but there's some technical reasons why it hasn't been able to be achieved until very recently, which includes enabling technologies that DNA barcoding, CRISPR encoded edits that can essentially introduce thousands of mutations all within one mouse. And can be tested against dozens of drugs. So we're multiplying the throughput several orders of magnitude, and I think it should create a completely new category of precision medicine. I know it sounds really I've done the kind of salesy pitch to it, but there'll be more information about it coming, and I'm excited about it.
Well, I mean, I'm sold. Send me the deck after we wrap up because I want to learn more.
Gotcha. And one last one I'll mention. I have to.
Yeah.
So another one is Ancora Ancora Biotech, and this is a company that is a spin out from a number of assets from the TenyoBio family. And as you know, TenyoBio had an exit to AbbVie, to Amgen, and recently we just led the 8 Series A to Ancora. And 3 weeks after leading the Series A, the first asset got sold for $1.3 billion in biobucks. So it's a very unique platform that essentially primarily had done in oncology. That's where we sold our first asset, but now we're going after other interesting areas like inflammaging and hepatitis B. So and that one's very public, and if people are interested, they should reach out.
We'll be excited to learn more. So looking ahead into the future then, what's coming next for Lightspeed?
Yeah, I think for Lightspeed, on our team, we just raised $7 billion worth of fresh funds. We want to keep doing what we've done so far for the past year and a half. There'll be new areas we're going to be emerging into. We've done a lot in oncology. We've done a number of interesting plays in autoimmune. We will continue to press those strengths that we're good at, but we're also open to new areas as well. Personally, myself, I'm interested in CNS opportunities. I'm interested in not just therapeutics companies too. I'm interested in tech-enabled life sciences opportunities. Anything from the new kind of bench slings of the world that are cropping up and are raising good seed companies to, again, decentralized clinical trials, manufacturing, things around that area. So those are particular areas of interest I would love to hear. And I think, at some point we'll start expanding the team here too. Right now, we're given the pace slow down at the beginning first of 22. We'll need to kind of weather that out over the next half year to a year. But yeah, no, we're excited. We just got to keep deploying, supporting all the good science that's out there. I mean, that's our mission as stewards of this capital, is get it to the right founders for the right opportunities.
A phenomenal goal I think we all resonate with. So before we come to a close then, a few rapid fire questions just to cap things off. I feel like first and foremost, we've talked a lot on the professional side. Maybe a personal question. How do you like to spend your free time?
Yeah, for me, now I have a 1-year-old, so I'm spending a lot of time with her it's been a total joy. So fatherhood, I really enjoy. As long as you have support, which I would encourage any parent there, have some support, and it makes life a bit easier. I would, but I personally like to play basketball. I'm a pickup basketball kind of guy. And I'm also trying to re-engage with my Kazakh roots and finding horseback archery situation here in the South Bay. So, we used to be the nomad horsemen of the Mongol Empire, right? Going across the continent. And so that is something I want to reinvigorate a little bit. And so I managed to find horseback archery here.
That's incredible. I mean, I'm tempted to come back out to the Bay just just to join you and experiencing it.
Oh, there you
Any
go.
any other closing thoughts, shameless plugs that you want to share before we wrap up?
Well, I just want to I think you guys, what you're building out with the community, the amount of resources that you're recording all this, sharing this. I think that is really helping out. I mean, I listen to your guys' podcasts. I've been hearing a lot of. I find that oftentimes more productive than a lot of my meetings. So I would encourage folks to do that. We should all collaborate a bit more often, do more shared learnings because that'll help our portfolios everywhere. And then I would say, yeah, I mean, Lightspeed, my last message would say, you might not have thought of Lightspeed as a big investor in the space, but while we're relatively new, we've been hitting the ground running, leading really strong syndicates with really strong founders and across stages. So it should open the gates to most founders. The answer is probably yes, and let's meet. And then after that, let's decide when the right time is to partner.
I love the improv quote to round things off. All right. Thank you, Galym, for an absolutely fantastic episode. Very grateful for your time. And thank you very much for the kind words. It's very flattering. Thank you again.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Take care.